Every spring between 1916 and 1970, black families packing for Chicago, Detroit, or Oakland did the same thing the night before the train. They cooked enough fried chicken, hard-boiled eggs, biscuits, and pound cake to last 18 hours in a hot Jim Crow car. The dining car was for white passengers only. Number 7 sustained a Sugar Hill kitchenette of 9 people on a porter's pay in 1944. Number 14 was the dish Ida Mae Brandon Gladney carried out of Chickasaw County, Mississippi in 1937. Number 22 was sold in covered enamel pots at rent parties for 50 cents a plate. Here's the part they leave out. These 25 dishes were not nostalgia. They were the engine of a 6 million person move north. Hit that subscribe button. Here are the 25 foods black migrants actually ate during the Great Migration. Number 25, sweet tea by the gallon. Picture a pickle jar washed clean and packed with sugar, lemon, and brewed black tea set on your great-grandmother's kitchen table the night before the train pulled out. The Illinois Central left Greenwood at 4:30 in the morning, and the ride to 12th Street Station in Chicago ran 18 hours. Black passengers in the Jim Crow coach could not buy a cup of coffee, a glass of water, or anything cold from the white-only dining car, 2 cars up. So they brought their own. Sweet tea brewed strong, sweetened heavy, and chilled overnight on a back porch was the way a family stayed alive across a long summer ride. Ida Mae Gladney remembered her mother boiling 4 pounds of sugar into a single gallon for the trip out of Chickasaw County in 1937. The sweetness was not a flavor, it was calories. It was fuel for children who would not eat hot food again until Memphis. Number 24, peach cobbler from the church kitchen. Imagine getting off a Greyhound at the corner of State and Lake in 1947 with everything you owned in a single suitcase. A deacon, a cousin, or a preacher's wife from a storefront church on the south side met you at the curb. The first thing she handed you was a paper plate of peach cobbler. The peaches were canned, Libby's bought by the case from a wholesale grocer on Maxwell Street. The crust was lard and self-rising flour mixed in a cracked enamel bowl. Olivet Baptist on South Park Way, the largest black congregation in Chicago, baked 60 cobblers a Sunday during the war years to feed new arrivals. The cobbler was warm. The pan was passed hand to hand. Nobody asked where you came from. They asked if you had a place to sleep. That cobbler is the reason most second-generation Chicagoans still associate the smell of cinnamon and baked peach with the word welcome. Number 23, Sunday smothered pork chops. Picture a third-floor walk-up on Hastings Street in Black Bottom, Detroit in 1949. A woman named Lucille kept a cast iron skillet on the stove from sunrise to sundown every Sunday. She browned thin-cut pork chops in bacon grease, pulled them out, made a roux from the drippings and self-rising flour, and let the gravy simmer down with sliced yellow onion until the chops fell apart on a fork. She fed 11 people at a 6-chair table. Hastings Street was the spine of a 40-block black district that the Chrysler Freeway tore through in 1959. The skillet survived the move to 12 Mile Road. The recipe survived 3 apartments after that. Smothered pork chops were the Sunday dish that turned a kitchenette into a home, and they cost less than $10 a plate at Eastern Market when the trimmings came in on Saturday afternoon. Number 22, Potlikker sopped with cornbread. Mississippi Potlikker was not the same dish as Chicago Potlikker, even when the same hands cooked it. Down in Holmes County in 1932, Potlikker was the green water left in a black iron pot after turnip greens had simmered with salt pork and hot pepper for 4 hours over a wood stove. A sharecropping family poured the liquor over a wedge of skillet cornbread, and ate it with a tin spoon. It was breakfast, lunch, and supper on the days the smokehouse was empty. Up in Bronzeville in 1947, Potlikker changed. The greens were collards from a Maxwell Street cart, the smoked meat was a turkey neck instead of fatback, and the pot was an aluminum stock pot on a hot plate, because kitchenettes were not built for cast iron. The cornbread shifted from white meal to yellow because that was what the Jewel Tea on 47th Street stocked. The Potlikker itself stayed sacred. A migrant who had buried 2 parents in the Delta still drank it the way her grandmother had, standing at a chipped Formica counter in a 3rd-floor flat with the L train running past every 6 minutes. Generation after generation, the rule held: if you can taste it, you can taste your grandmother's trip. The dish was the part of Mississippi nothing in Chicago could change. Number 21, salt pork seasoning meat. The little white cube wrapped in butcher paper at the back of every black family's icebox in 1944 was not food in the way bacon is food. It was seasoning. Imagine a 2-inch slab of salt pork sliced into a pot of beans, a pot of greens, or a pot of black-eyed peas. It turned a sack of dried legumes from the A&P into a meal that fed 7 children. Salt pork cost about 9 cents a pound at a corner butcher in Harlem during the war, when the same pound of bacon cost 23. A retired sleeping car porter on the Illinois Central kept the slab going for 2 months, paring off a slice every Sunday. The cube shrank. The flavor stayed. 3 generations of black grandmothers in Bronzeville, Black Bottom, and Sugar Hill worked from the same cube. It was the cheapest piece of meat in your kitchen and the most important. Number 20, cornmeal mush for breakfast. Before the kitchenette had a refrigerator, before the corner store sold cold milk, before your great-grandmother in Detroit could afford a box of cream of wheat, breakfast was cornmeal mush in a cast iron pot. Picture white cornmeal stirred into salted water until the spoon stood up on its own, dished out hot with a spoon of butter and a drizzle of cane syrup. It was the same breakfast a Mississippi grandmother had made over a wood fire in 1908. It was the same breakfast a Detroit auto worker's wife made over a gas burner in 1948. The recipe never changed because the recipe never had to. Day after day, the pot came out the same. Cornmeal mush fed 3 children for 11 cents in the Depression and 4 children for 19 cents during the war. When the cornmeal ran out, mush became hot water cornbread, fried in a spoonful of bacon grease and stacked on a plate. Either way, the day started full. Number 19, candied yams at Sylvia's. When Sylvia Woods opened a luncheonette on Lenox Avenue between 126th and 127th in 1962, she had 35 seats, 6 stools, and 1 recipe she refused to change for any customer. Her candied yams used Louisiana sweet potatoes, a stick of butter, light brown sugar, and a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. She baked them for 2 hours at low heat and never added marshmallows, which she considered a northern habit. Sylvia had moved up from Hemingway, South Carolina in 1944, working in a hat factory before she bought the lunch counter from the man who hired her as a waitress. The candied yams ran on every plate special for 63 years. By 1985, the line for Sunday dinner stretched 3 doors south. By 2005, a busload of tourists arrived every Saturday morning. Sylvia kept the recipe in a notebook in the office, written in pencil, the only copy. The yams traveled 3,000 miles from a low-country kitchen to a Harlem booth and changed nothing on the way. Number 18, black-eyed peas on New Year's. The USDA documented in a 1962 nutritional survey that black households in Chicago, Detroit, and New York consumed black-eyed peas on January 1st at a rate 7 times higher than the national average. The dish was Hoppin John, brought north from the Low Country by way of 1 million migrants between 1916 and 1955. The recipe ran the same in every kitchen, the way the calendar always rolled the same. Dried black-eyed peas, soaked overnight, simmered with a smoked ham hock, served over white rice with a sliver of green collard on the side. Each pea on your plate stood for a coin. Each plate stood for a year of luck. The Pittsburgh Courier in 1949 ran a recipe column that called Hoppin John the only Southern dish a migrant should never abandon. By 1970, a black grocery on Lenox sold dried black-eyed peas for 22 cents a pound. The dish on the plate did not change. The years it bought did not change either. Number 17, collard greens with smoked turkey. In the South, a pot of greens always meant a slab of fatback, a ham hock, or a piece of smoked neckbone. That was the rule. The Great Migration broke the rule, not because black cooks wanted to, but because pork was harder to come by in a Chicago corner store than in a Holmes County smokehouse. The substitute smoked turkey wing or smoked turkey neck became the Chicago and Detroit standard by the late 1950s. A pound of smoked turkey wing cost about 38 cents in 1958. The greens themselves came in tied bundles from a Maxwell Street vegetable cart on Saturday morning, 2 pounds for a quarter, washed in a tub on the kitchen floor because the apartment had only a hand sink. A black woman in Bronzeville in 1962 spent 4 hours cooking down a single pot of collards. She added cane vinegar at the end, a habit she had brought up from Greenwood, Mississippi. The pot fed 5 children, 2 boarders, and the husband when he came home from the steel mill. The Potlikker went into a mason jar and was sopped with cornbread for breakfast the next morning. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing had ever been thrown away. The rule held. The recipe traveled 600 miles north and only one ingredient changed. The technique stayed exactly the same as it had been in 1908. The smoked turkey wing was a small surrender to a northern grocery store. The pot of greens was a refusal to surrender anything else. Number 16, hominy grits from the Home Milling Company. In 1922, a small mill opened at Catherine and Russell Streets in Detroit. The Home Milling Company ground hominy grits, white cornmeal, and whole wheat flour for a customer base that did not exist in Detroit before the Great Migration. By 1945, the company was supplying every black-owned bakery in Paradise Valley and most of the corner groceries in Black Bottom. A 2-pound bag of stone ground white grits cost 31 cents. The grits were what a migrant woman from Alabama bought in her first week in Detroit because grits were the one thing a northern grocery did not stock and the one thing she could not start the day without. Picture grits cooked low and slow with a tablespoon of bacon grease and a pinch of salt. The grits anchored breakfast for 11 children in a Hastings Street walk-up. The Home Milling Company shut down in 1962 when the freeway came through. The grits did not stop. Quaker Oats took over the shelf space. Number 15, salmon croquettes from the can. A red and silver can of pink salmon sat on the shelf of every black household in Harlem and Chicago by 1948. Chicken of the Sea sold a 1-pound can for 34 cents. The can fed 5 people. The recipe was simple. Drain the can, pick out the bones, mix the salmon with a beaten egg, a half cup of yellow cornmeal, a pinch of black pepper, and a chopped green onion. Form into 8 cakes. Fry in a 1/4 inch of bacon grease until both sides were the color of dark amber. Serve with white rice and a slice of yellow tomato. The dish was Friday night dinner in 9 of every 10 black households in Bronzeville during Lent, because the Catholic and Methodist congregations alike kept the no-meat rule. The salmon croquette was the immigrant version of a Mississippi catfish supper, made portable by a tin can and a 5-cent stamp on a Sears mail order coupon. Number 14, Hoppin John, brought up from the Low Country. George Swanson. Starling stepped off a silver meteor train at Pennsylvania Station on April 14, 1945, with $34 in his coat pocket and a paper bag holding 3 mason jars of dried beans his mother had pressed into his hands at the Wildwood, Florida depot. 1 jar was field peas, 1 jar was butter beans, the 3rd jar was black-eyed peas she had grown in a kitchen garden behind the family's shotgun house. He was 26 years old. He had just outrun a lynch mob organized by a citrus grower whose pickers George had tried to unionize. The peas were what he carried instead of money he did not have. Starling settled at 132nd Street and 7th Avenue in Harlem in a boarding house run by a woman from Camden, South Carolina, who recognized the jars before George said a word. She soaked the black-eyed peas overnight, simmered them with a smoked ham hock she got at the Lenox Avenue butcher for 9 cents, and served them over white rice on New Year's Day, 1946. 11 boarders sat at a long table that night. Each one had come up from a different southern state, and each one had eaten Hoppin John on January 1st every year of his life. The dish was the only food on the table that did not need a recipe. Every man at the table could have cooked it blindfolded. George Starling stayed at that boarding house for 4 years. He paid $4 a week for a room and a Sunday plate. The Hoppin John never came off the menu. Isabel Wilkerson tracked him down in 1996, 50 years later, in the same neighborhood. He still kept a jar of dried black-eyed peas above the stove. He still cooked them every January 1st. The mason jar was the same one his mother had handed him in Wildwood. He had emptied and refilled it for half a century. That jar is the Great Migration in 3 glass walls and a brass lid. Number 13, neck bones over rice. A pound of pork neck bones cost 12 cents at a Maxwell Street butcher in 1953, less than half the price of a pound of pork chops. The neck bones were what your great-grandmother bought on a Friday afternoon when the steel mill check had to last until Tuesday. She browned the bones in a heavy pot, added 2 cups of water, half a chopped yellow onion, vinegar, and black pepper, and let the pot simmer for 3 hours while she ironed the boys' Sunday shirts. The meat slid off the bones by the time supper was on the table. White rice caught the gravy. A side of greens went on your plate. The dish fed 7 children for under $1. By the late 1960s, neck bones had moved from the cheap shelf to the cult shelf. Soul food cookbooks from Sylvia Woods and Edna Lewis listed neck bones as a signature. The price stayed low. The pot stayed full. Number 12, pig feet in vinegar brine. A jar of pickled pig feet sat on the back counter of every black-owned tavern in Bronzeville from 1932 to 1968. The Palm Tavern at 446 East 47th Street kept a 5-gallon glass jar on the bar and sold a single foot for 15 cents in 1939, a quarter in 1956, and 40 cents in 1965. The brine was apple cider vinegar, kosher salt, mustard seed, hot pepper flake, and sliced yellow onion. The feet had been cleaned, simmered for 3 hours with a bay leaf, packed in the jar, and left for a week in the cooler. Picture a jazz musician finishing a set at the Sunset Cafe, walking across the street, ordering a foot and a beer, and eating it off a piece of butcher paper with his fingers. The dish was a country dish. It was the cheapest piece of the hog. It was the part black families had been given as scrap by the enslaver before the Civil War, and the part they had turned into a delicacy by 1900. The Palm Tavern jar was a descendant of the same jar a freedwoman had kept on her smokehouse shelf in Greenville, Mississippi in 1875. The migration carried the jar north. The brine kept the foot kept a piece of Mississippi alive in a Chicago barroom for 36 years. When the building came down for the State Street redevelopment in 1968, the jar moved to a tavern that lasted 3 more years before the wrecking ball came back. The recipe survived in a handwritten notebook owned by the bar's last cook, a woman from Indianola who had come up in 1938. The Palm Tavern is gone. The recipe is not. A pickled pig foot is the small thing the migration carried that the wrecking ball could not take. Number 11, oxtail stew appeared on juke joint menus as the kind of slow-cooked luxury that turned tough cuts into velvet. The bony tail sections were browned in batches, then braised for hours with onions, carrots, and tomatoes until the meat fell from the bone and the collagen melted into silky sauce. Each piece required gnawing and sucking to extract every bit of flavor, making the eating slow and satisfying. Juke joints served oxtail over rice, the grains soaking up the rich gravy while customers worked through bones. The dish was Caribbean influenced in some establishments, seasoned with allspice and Scotch bonnet peppers that added heat and complexity. Oxtail cost less than prime cuts, but delivered richness that expensive steaks could not match. This was food for people who understood that time and technique created value. Number 10, chitterlings on rent party Saturdays. Picture a Harlem apartment door in 1928, open from 9 at night until 4 in the morning, a quarter at the door, and a pot of chitterlings simmering on the kitchen stove. Langston Hughes collected over 500 rent party invitation cards across his Sugar Hill years. Half of them advertised chitterlings by name. The dish was hog intestines, cleaned 3 times in cold water, simmered with a yellow onion, a hot pepper, and a splash of cider vinegar for 4 hours until the kitchen smelled like Mississippi in a heat wave. A plate at a rent party cost 50 cents. The pot fed 20 people. Fats Waller played piano in the front room. Willie the Lion Smith took over at midnight. The host paid the landlord on Monday morning out of the chitterlings money. The dish kept the apartment. The apartment kept the family. The family kept the migration story alive. Number 9, Maxwell Street Hot Links. The stand at the corner of Maxwell and Halstead opened at 6 in the morning in 1939. A red neon sign in the front window read, "Polish and Hot Links." A Macedonian immigrant named Jimmy Stefanovich ran the grill. A line of black migrants from the Mississippi Delta ran down the sidewalk. By 1950, the stand was selling 4,000 sandwiches on a Saturday. The hot link was a beef and pork sausage seasoned with cayenne, garlic, paprika, and black pepper, grilled over an open flame, piled on a soft white bun, topped with grilled yellow onions, yellow mustard, and a green sport pepper. The price was a quarter. The smoke from the grill drifted 3 blocks in every direction. You stepped off the Illinois Central at 12th Street Station the night before and could find the stand by the smell alone. The hot link is the rare migration food invented in the North by a non-black hand and adopted whole by Black Chicago without changing a single ingredient. It worked because the line out front was always black. You waited your turn. The price never moved past a quarter for almost 10 years. Number 8, fried catfish and spaghetti. The pairing made no sense to anyone outside Chicago. Inside Chicago, the pairing was Friday night dinner in black households from 63rd Street to Howard from 1948 forward. The catfish came up from the Mississippi River by refrigerated rail car, dressed and packed in shaved ice by a black-owned fishery in Greenville. A 2-pound box arrived at the Inglewood Market on Wednesday and was gone by Friday afternoon. The fish was rolled in yellow cornmeal, seasoned with black pepper, cayenne, and salt, fried in a cast iron skillet at 350 degrees, drained on a brown paper grocery bag, and laid across a plate of spaghetti dressed in a thin tomato gravy. The two dishes did not touch on a southern plate. They touched on a Chicago plate because the kitchenette was small, the burners were two, and a single plate had to do the work of an entire Sunday dinner. The pairing stayed Chicago. It never crossed the line into Detroit. It never made it to Harlem. It is the most regional black migration dish in America. Number 7, smothered chicken in Bronzeville kitchenettes. A kitchenette in Bronzeville in 1943 was a single room cut out of a former mansion on South Park Way, a hot plate on a wooden crate, a hand sink in the corner, and a single window opening on an air shaft. 4 families shared a bathroom down the hall. A laundress from Yazoo City, Mississippi, raised 3 children and a niece in 220 square feet of that building. She cooked smothered chicken every Sunday for 14 years. A fryer cut into 8 pieces, dredged in self-rising flour, browned in bacon grease in a number 10 cast iron skillet set aside, and a roux built from the drippings. Sliced yellow onion, 2 cups of chicken stock, a tablespoon of cane vinegar, and black pepper went into the pan. The chicken returned, the lid went on, and the hot plate sat low for an hour and 10 minutes. The chicken came out tender enough to pull apart with a fork. The gravy went over long grain white rice and mustard greens, cooked down with a smoked turkey wing. The plate cost 23 cents to make. It fed 5 people with leftovers reheated for Monday breakfast. The laundress fed 3 boarders alongside her own family every Sunday. She was paid $4 a head a week for the room and the plate. That $16 was the difference between paying the rent and being put out on the curb. The smothered chicken was not just dinner. The smothered chicken was the rent. Multiply that single kitchen by 12,000 kitchenettes across Bronzeville. 12,000 smothered chickens went on 12,000 hot plates every Sunday. Sunday after Sunday, the same dish, the same gravy, the same 6 families on 1 gas burner. The dish was the largest unbilled labor of the Great Migration, almost none of it ever written down. The recipe lived in the muscle memory of women whose daughters walked into Harold's Chicken Shack on 47th and Greenwood after 1950 and tasted the same gravy. Number 6, pound cake squares. Picture a buttery slab of pound cake wrapped in white wax paper, the last thing your grandmother packed into your shoebox before you boarded the train north. The cake was a single recipe in 1,000 kitchens. 1 pound of eggs, 1 pound of sugar, 1 pound of flour, 1 pound of butter. The eggs were beaten until they ribboned off a wooden spoon. The cake baked in a tube pan for an hour and a quarter. It came out heavy, dense, sweet, and slow to spoil. A pound cake wrapped in wax paper, kept 4 days at room temperature in a Jim Crow coach. You ate a 2-inch square at noon, a 2-inch square at sundown, a 2-inch square at midnight. By the time the train pulled into 12th Street Station, your cake was gone and your son was in Chicago. The recipe never had to be written down. Every black woman south of Memphis already knew it. Number 5, country ham biscuits. A country ham was salt cured for 9 months in a smokehouse in Surry County, Virginia, before it was sliced paper thin, layered between 2 halves of a buttermilk biscuit, and packed into a shoebox for the train ride to Newark. The biscuit was self-rising flour, lard, and buttermilk baked in a hot oven for 12 minutes. The ham was sweet, salty, and dense. The biscuit was light enough to hold the ham without falling apart. You ate one at the start of your trip and saved the second for your layover at Penn Station. By 1950, the country ham biscuit had crossed into black-owned diners on Lenox Avenue, where it was sold for 35 cents alongside a cup of coffee for 10 more. The dish never lost its travel association. It was the breakfast you ate when you were going somewhere, and that somewhere was always north. Number 4, sweet potato pone slabs. Imagine the dense, custardy, slow-baked cousin of the candied yam. 2 pounds of grated raw sweet potato, a cup of cane syrup, 2 beaten eggs, a half cup of evaporated milk, nutmeg, and melted butter went into a greased baking dish and into a slow oven for 2 hours. The pone came out the color of dark caramel, sliceable, portable, and dense enough to stay in shape inside a shoebox. A 2-inch slab kept 3 days at room temperature, longer in cool weather. The pone was your dessert option when your family had no eggs to spare for pound cake. It was the cheaper traveler. It was your great-grandmother's contribution. By 1962, sweet potato pone had largely vanished from northern black kitchens, replaced by sweet potato pie. The pone survived in Mississippi and South Carolina church kitchens, where the older women still made it the same way. The recipe held. Number 3, hot water cornbread wrapped in wax paper. The hot water cornbread that traveled in a shoebox lunch was not the skillet cornbread that came out of a Sunday oven. Picture a small flat patty of yellow cornmeal mixed with boiling water, salt, and a tablespoon of bacon grease, fried golden in a 1/4 inch of hot lard, drained on a brown paper bag and stacked in a shoebox between sheets of waxed butcher paper. 3 patties to a sheet, 6 sheets to a box. The patty held its shape for 2 days. Your grandmother in Greenwood made the cornbread the night before your family boarded the Illinois Central, while the chicken was still cooling on a rack. By the time the train hit Memphis at 3 in the afternoon, the cornbread was eaten. The grease in the patty stuck to the paper. The cornmeal flavor was simple. The dish was simple. Migration was not simple. The cornbread carried it. Number 2, hard-boiled eggs and salt twists. The single most repeated item in the contents of a Great Migration shoebox lunch was a hard-boiled egg. 6 eggs to a family of 5, peeled and packed against the bottom of the box. 2 folded squares of waxed paper held a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of black pepper. The salt twist was the seasoning. The egg was the protein. The combination was the cheapest portable food a mother could send her child north on. A dozen eggs cost 28 cents at a corner grocery in Indianola, Mississippi in 1937. 6 eggs traveled 1,400 miles to Newark for 14 cents. The shell came off slowly in a Jim Crow coach with no running water. You cracked your egg against the wooden seat back, peeled it into the same square of wax paper that held your salt, dipped and ate it in 3 bites. The shells went into a paper sack on the floor. The salt twist went back into the box for the next egg. Number 1, shoebox fried chicken. The cold fried chicken in the shoebox was the single most important meal in the Great Migration. The Pullman dining cars were closed to black passengers for the entire span of the migration, from the first train out of Mississippi in 1916 to the last sleeper coach on a segregated route in 1965. Imagine your great-grandmother in the Delta cooking enough chicken to feed you across an 18-hour ride to Chicago or a 38-hour ride to Oakland. The recipe was the same in every kitchen south of the Mason-Dixon. A whole fryer cut into 10 pieces, brined for an hour in salted buttermilk, dredged in seasoned flour, fried in a heavy iron skillet of hot lard, drained on a brown paper grocery bag, and cooled on the back porch. Cold fried chicken kept 8 hours wrapped in wax paper, 12 if the weather was cool. Your family of 5 carried 2 whole birds in a single shoebox. You ate the chicken with your fingers, dropped the bones into a paper sack, and folded the wax paper back over the leftovers. By the time the train pulled into 12th Street Station, the box was empty and the family was in a city where a restaurant might or might not serve you coffee. The chicken was the pact. The chicken was the proof. The chicken was the part of home that came north and never went back.
Cranberry orange gelatin mold was the festive centerpiece that sparkled under holiday lights, sitting proudly in its familiar metal mold on Christmas tables throughout the 1960s. Mothers mixed cranberry sauce, orange zest, sugar, and gelatin, pouring the mixture into molds shaped like rings, wreaths, or holiday designs. When it chilled overnight, it emerged glossy and jewel-toned, firm enough to hold its shape, but soft enough to melt on the tongue. Children loved the wobble, tapping the plate lightly just to see it jiggle before taking a bite. The flavor balanced tart cranberry with bright citrus, making it refreshing alongside heavier holiday dishes. Mothers appreciated that it required few ingredients, stretched far, and looked impressive without costing much. It added color to plates filled with greens, dressing, and meats, offering a sweet note between savory bites. This dish represented the creativity and pride mothers brought to holiday meals, transforming canned and simple ingredients into something festive and memorable. Even decades later, people remembered the cool sweetness and the joy of unmolding it just right. Cranberry orange gelatin mold tasted like holiday sparkles shaped by steady hands.
Number 2, salt pork. Soldiers called it sow belly. The Army issued 3/4 of a pound a day on campaign, packed in heavy wooden barrels with so much salt the meat could outlast a steamboat journey. You sliced it thin and fried it until the fat ran clear. That fat then cooked everything else. Beans, onions, hardtack, leftover coffee grounds, all of it went into the same skillet. Buffalo soldiers in the 10th Cavalry at Fort Concho in 1875 ate sow belly 6 days out of 7. The meat itself was tough and sharply salted, like a brick of cured leather. The grease was the real prize. That grease seasoned every pot from El Paso to Fort Robinson, Nebraska. A trooper learned to cook from the rendered fat first, the meat second. Now here is the part most people miss. Sow belly was not loved, it was respected. Cavalry cooks treated it like a tool, not a treat, and the men ate it every other day for years on end. They didn't complain, they couldn't afford to.
Rumaki wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better.
Number 23, Brunswick stew. This was the meal that fed entire churches on a Sunday afternoon. The original came out of Virginia in the 1820s. And by the time it reached Black communities across the Deep South, it had become something different, something better. A senior would take whatever meat was on sale, usually chicken thighs at 39 cents a pound, and drop them in a pot with canned tomatoes, corn, lima beans, potatoes, and a splash of vinegar. 2 hours of simmering and the chicken fell apart into a thick, smoky broth. One batch made enough for 4 days. A woman named Lucille Harper in Savannah, Georgia, made Brunswick stew every other week for 14 years after her husband died in 1969. She never measured a thing. She said your hands know what a pot needs if you've been cooking long enough. The truth is, it belonged to whoever needed a cheap meal that tasted like someone loved them. Number 3, Army-issue dried beans. Pinto, Navy, or whatever the subsistence department shipped that quarter. A Buffalo soldier received about 1/10 of a pound per day, which sounds small until you stew it for 6 hours and watch a cup of dry beans become 4 cups of supper. The cooks at Fort Davis soaked beans overnight in canteens, then simmered them all day in a single iron pot with salt pork and a halved onion if anyone had one. By 1880, dried beans were the most reliable thing in the mess. They survived heat, weevils, and bad water. They filled a man up and kept him filled. Number 9 on this list grew straight out of this same pot, only with chili and Mexican spice. Beans were the floor of every Western post kitchen. Here's what surprised me reading the regimental cookbooks. The bean pot was passed between cooks like a sacred object, never washed dry, only wiped, so each new pot tasted of the last. That habit is older than the army itself. Your grandmother in Mississippi worked her stew pot the same way. The continuity is the story.
Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form.
Number 22, butter bean succotash pot. Butter beans were the quiet backbone of Black Southern cooking. They were cheap. They kept for months dried, and they turned creamy when you cooked them low and slow. A senior would soak a cup of dry butter beans overnight, then simmer them the next day with corn cut off the cob, a piece of salt pork, onions, and a little water. 2 hours later, the beans had broken down into a thick, starchy stew that did not need a single other dish beside it. In the 1950s, a bag of dry butter beans cost 15 cents and fed a person for a week. The salt pork was often left over from another meal already paid for. A retired seamstress in Natchez, Mississippi, ate butterbean succotash 4 nights a week for 7 years. She grew the beans herself in a garden behind her house until her knees gave out in 1978. After that, she bought them dried from the corner store and never complained about the difference. The meal didn't change. Her body did. The pot didn't care. Number 5, skillet cornbread. The Army issued cornmeal as a substitute when wheat flour ran short. Buffalo soldiers in the 24th Infantry marching through New Mexico in 1879 lived on cornmeal, mush, and skillet cornbread for 9 straight days. The recipe was simple and powerful. 2 cups cornmeal, a pinch of salt, water, a spoon of bacon grease. You poured it into a hot iron skillet, set the lid on, and shoveled coals over the top. 12 minutes later, you had a golden dish that broke into 8 wedges. The cooks learned the timing by smell, not clock. Cornbread on the frontier was not Southern soul food yet. It was just supper. But every Black trooper from Tennessee or Mississippi or the Carolinas tasted home in it. The skillet cornbread of the 9th Cavalry was the first link in a chain that would later run through every soul food kitchen in America. Your grandmother made it Sunday after Sunday in iron skillets passed down through generations. The recipe stayed the same. The continuity is unbroken.
Salmon croquettes were the breakfast of ingenuity, born from tin cans and imagination. Canned salmon was mixed with onions, cornmeal, and a bit of egg shaped into patties and fried until crisp. The smell filled the house like a promise that the day would be all right. They were crunchy on the outside, tender inside, and full of flavor that reached far beyond their humble ingredients. The sizzle of the skillet was music, the sound of a meal stretching to feed everyone. Eaten with grits, biscuits, or a little mustard on the side, they turned a simple morning into something memorable. These croquettes were survival disguised as comfort food, proof that scarcity never stopped creativity. They were hearty enough for men heading to work and tasty enough to make children smile. The golden crust caught the light just right, shining like victory in the pan. Salmon croquettes were a triumph of spirit and taste over circumstance.
These 25 dishes are the Great Migration on a plate. They moved with 6 million people across 54 years and 1,400 miles. They built the kitchens that built the wards, that built the modern Black North. So which one would your great-grandmother have packed into the shoebox the night before she boarded the train, and which one is still on your Sunday table today? Tell us in the comments, because remembering the recipe is one thing. Remembering the journey the recipe survived is the work that keeps the kitchen alive